Hi, I'm Phil Ball, pastor of Odyssey Christian Church in Jenks, Oklahoma. We're part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and we offer a non-judgmental approach to support your personal journey of faith. After the message, we invite you to keep listening for a presentation from our wonderful band. And if you want to experience worship live, we invite you to find out all the details at www.facebook.com/Odyssey CC. Tonight, I'm kind of finishing off a series. I've been doing, kind of unnamed women, but tonight it's kind of the man with whose name was only a number. And I like that because we talked about some of the women whenever we were doing the bad girls of the Bible that were unnamed, and I just felt that it'd be good to do this story. And this is a story that Luke has put in the 8th chapter of his gospel, and it's a series. There's 3 stories in a row. And Luke would do things like this a lot of times. And the more you mess with the Gospels, I will just tell you, the more you start seeing, oh, what a piece of literature. And this is where it's the center section of 3. And the first story is the story that dramatizes, how do I say that? Dramatizes Christ's mastery over storms. And some of you may be familiar with the story where Jesus, and Rembrandt painted a really famous painting of it, where Jesus is in the back of this boat and they're floating on the Sea of Galilee, and that's where the storms come up at night, and he's asleep back in the back of the boat. And the disciples are all up there and this storm comes up, and in the Rembrandt painting, he paints himself in the boat as one of the disciples. And they all get freaked out like we normally would, and they say, Jesus, don't you care about this? We're going to be sunk. And he wakes up and tells the storm to be calm and all that kind of stuff. And basically, the text says they were afraid and amazed and said to one another, who then is this that he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him? And that's the first story where Jesus has mastery over the natural elements. And then this is the middle story where it has to do with Jesus having mastery over demons. And the one that immediately follows this is the story where he goes into the Jairus, who's the head of the synagogue, comes to him and says, my daughter's dying. And then she dies, and then Jesus raises her from the dead. And in those 3 stories, Luke is out to say that Jesus is Lord of all. And so tonight, our story has to do with Jesus as master over demons. And I want to suggest to you that there's some really cool things that we can learn from this. I almost, as I got finished with it, putting it all together in the appropriate manner this morning, I almost sent an email out to everybody that says, y'all be in church tonight, it's going to be really good. So I hope that it's as good as I thought it was going to be, but we'll see how it is. There's some really important clues about how to do with stuff. Okay, so Jesus is expanding his ministry. He's going into the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. It's kind of, if you look at it in the map, there it is on the far. The Sea of Galilee is that little blue thing up there, and it's far down into the right, and it's in non-Jewish territory, if you would. But there's all this stuff that's happening. So he goes over there, and so you can see what's happening. Well. And so then I would say put in the second picture, Joe, where a man of the city who had demons met him. And for a long time he had worn no clothes. He did not live in a house, but in the tombs. And so in the understanding of many, the world was populated by demons, spirits, nymphs, centaurs, angels, and phones. No, I just had to say that. It was fun. And so, that there's all these kind of things that were going on, and all these entities control the natural processes and took possessions of persons or control their fate. Okay? So, we don't really live in that world anymore, but I need you to know that was the world that they lived in. And it said that demons could enter a person through their ear, nose, or mouth. And so amulets and magic and sacrifices and rituals were all needed if one were to have any hope of appeasing or escaping these spiritual powers. So the stories of Jesus to exorcise demons demonstrates this power and elicits faith. I know when I was at another church, there was a person who worked in the Child Development Center who was Native American. And because of our relationship, she came into my office one day and started talking about how this other person had a grudge with her, and this other Native American had put in a kind of a spell on her and done these different things. And so, and of course, I take all this quite seriously. I'm not, I don't poo-poo any of this. And so I basically said, you are a Christian? And she said, yes. I said, well, it seems to me that part of the message that we get, which is the message consistent with this particular story, is that Jesus has more power than all those demons. And so what I invite you to do is to use that to ward off your relationship with Christ, to ward off the power of this other person. And she, you would never know her name, but her name was Sally, and she was really cool. And so Sally and I talked later, and it seemed like that had been a helpful experience. And so Jesus encounters this guy, and the first thing out of his mouth is, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" And so the story goes, when he saw Jesus, he fell down to him and shouted at the top of the voice what I just said. And he says, "I beg you, do not torment me," which then in the story shows how Jesus has power over this demon. And for Jesus had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. And then, parentheses, for many times it had seized him, he was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the wilds. So while we no longer use chains and shackles, but we use straitjackets, padded cells, injections, tranquilizers, and electric shocks, but still some mentally ill persons are, quote, driven into the wilds. So this gospel story affirms that the compassion that Jesus had as he led him to across the sea to reach this guy and to hold on to him, and he was able to vanquish these greatest imaginable assembly of demons and restore this man to wholeness. And so all of us, when we have those times, because there's times, unless your life is really different from mine, there are times when you just get anxious and there's stuff that happens and it's out of control, or something that comes on that's a real surprise. And what I'm inviting you to do is to begin to turn to your faith and at those times and ask for help, because I think it's available. There's a word of hope and assurance in that process. And the first thing Jesus does as he turns, as this story progresses, in verse 30, Jesus asks him, "What is your name?" And Jesus first demonstrates his power over the demon by requiring it to divulge its name. Legion is a number rather than a name, and it conveys a significant kind of a thing. In Rome, a Roman legion was composed of between 5,000 and 6,000 men. Okay, so when you say that your name was Legion because you have 5,000 or 6,000 demons, give or take a few hundred, that's a lot. And yet it speaks a word to all of us for when we do that. Now, but there's a piece of this that I want to take apart, and I want you to journey with me on this. When you say, and there are times I expect you say, my name is a mob, my name is many, my name is Legion. And the first thing that this guy does is acknowledge that he's got issues. And he acknowledged that he no longer has any individual identity. He's lost his name, he's lost his individuality, he's lost his relationship in the community. He was I love this phrase, a boiling struggle of conflicting forces, okay? There's been some times that I have felt that way, and a person who loves me would tell me to lighten up, and I would say, if there was a dial on the back of my head, I would turn it to low. Okay, but there's just sometimes it's that way, and so you just deal with it. But the first thing is to acknowledge that. That's the first step in addressing your demons, because some people are they're just pushed around by their demons. They're just pushed, and they just do these things that are usually destructive because they haven't even acknowledged that they've got it going on. But then the second step is to begin to reflect and name those issues, to name them one by one, to tangle them out. And that's exactly what Jesus does. What is your name? And he calls that out. And that's a model for us, it seems to me. And I know it's a task that's easier said than done, because my experience has been that behind an initial cause, there's issues. And discovering those issues sometimes takes help. It takes somebody asking questions and helping you reflect and push back into that. And I know that one of the demons that I had that I will share with you, because it's not a big dramatic demon, it'd never make it on TV. But it's like my mom was really super organized, and she had sequence, and she did all these things, was very comfortable paying attention to details. And I really never realized how much I was like her. My father was kind of on the other end of the teeter-totter, and he would go to town to get something that she had asked him to do and then forget what it was. And he was kind of a space cadet in some respects. My dad made the comments, and y'all have heard me say things like this: if you can't spell the same word 3 different ways in one paragraph, you don't have much imagination. And my dad would just come out with stuff like that, because he would do that. And I remember out in the garage when I was a kid, I liked to make lots of guns with wood, and he found an old stock of a air rifle or something, and he found a pipe, and I knew how to make what appeared to be clips that held machine gun bullets, round ones, out of coffee cans. And so I had one of those hanging around, and he put it on top of this thing, and it made this great British World War I machine gun, you know, and I had more fun shooting at birds in the sky with that thing. And I got a piece of, y'all wanted to know all this, I know, got a piece of sheet and made a belt to hold all my bullets, you know, or imagination bullets, so that they didn't get clogged up in the works. And I would just run it past this thing, and we'd shoot things and stuff with it. Well, he had a great imagination. My mother could never figure any of that stuff out. But on the other hand, she allowed me to build model airplanes inside her house with glue that later on teenagers would use to get high. And I never got high, but my Lord, that stuff smelled. And it was like, I grew as an adult, and I had both of those characters almost equally in me. And so I would beat myself up because of detail, and I would be creative because of this and something else, and I had all these kind of conflicts going on. And it was in my 30s when I figured out, oh, that's the ticket. I'm both of them in one package. Now, and I'm not going to go into any more detail about why that was, but just that's the way we show up. And once you begin to address it and open it up and get it out, but only in the climate of acceptance that Jesus does, he comes and he accepts however we are. I love that Dennis was doing the Come As You Are thing, and then Stoner picked out the Come As You Are to worship song, and it really dramatizes how that is. Okay, here's a specific story, not mine. This is a direct quote from Carrie Otis. Anybody recognize her face? She's a supermodel lady. If you've watched many Sports Illustrated swimsuit models, you've seen her several times. And this is her story. This is a direct quote and from her story. Many of us experience some sort of sexual dysfunction. All too often, we continue silence those fears and concerns. We continue to do that. Intimacy can be scary, and there are so many expectations and habits that arise and seem to even override the quest for a healthy and safe union with another person. It can be a challenge to address the deepest wounds in our lives, but we must do it. On my journey toward wellness and healing, I had to really take a long, hard look at my past as well as my present and decide how I wanted my future to look. Now, for me, that's what I call an act of faith. If somebody says, do you have faith? Well, it's not a matter of who do you believe in. It's can you make that journey that she's on. She says, I'm a survivor of both rape and domestic violence. Years of suppression, rather than acknowledgement, had me living my life and experiencing relationships on a kind of autopilot, completely disconnected from my heart and my feelings. It was too frightening to let someone in. On a physical level, I could, but to let someone into my heart and the vulnerability of intimacy seemed impossible for me. I had certain habits that enable me to endure what past experience had convinced me would be frightening or uncomfortable. Now, it's my belief that Jesus holds us and lifts us and helps us make that journey that she's on, guides us as we face our names and paint our faces on our personal demons. But I think there's even more to learn about this story. Now, this is kind of just a little cute part, but I think there's some things to teach in it. The abyss. They begged him not to order them to go back into the abyss. And the abyss in New Testament times was the place where disobedient spirits were imprisoned. But nevertheless, it's clear that the demons negotiate their fate and that Jesus allows them to enter the swine because Jesus does not want to beat them up. And now I think, go figure about that. I don't understand that because God has a lot more grace than I am. If I could get rid of demons where they wouldn't do anything, I'd get rid of them. But Jesus negotiates with them. And then he sends them into the swine herd. Now they're hillside, a large herd of swine were feeding, and the demons begged Jesus to let them enter. So he gave them permission. Another statement on the part of the gospel is talking about how Jesus has power over those pieces. Now the question in our lives is, do we feel that? And I will tell you that there's a little humorous aside that Luke put in there, because this is a story that Jews would love, because Jewish piety did not like swine. That was a dirty animal for them and their religious beliefs. And also with the tombs and the Gentile uncleanliness, all those kind of things. And so one can only imagine the delight that Jewish Christians would have heard when they were hearing this story. But in a larger theological sense, I think it's important to us to see that even in this world of demons, he gives them permission. Now, here's a really interesting twist. I've left that section. I just wanted to put that in there to show you about negotiation, because I've run into so many people in my life who feel like they don't have a right to ask God for something. And it's like, here we've got models and pictures of Jesus negotiating with the bad guys and not throwing them into outer darkness. But then after all this happens, you get this people's response. And that's the part that I think is just the most amazing. In my arrogance, I start being really finger pointy and condemning, but wait, there's more. When the swineherd saw what had happened, they ran off and told it in the city and in the country, and then the people came out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed in his right mind, and they were afraid. Now, what is that about? And they're afraid. Okay, let's find out. So those who had seen it told him how the one who had been possessed by demons had been healed, and then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them. Okay? I've always thought, well, you dumb butts. What is this? You got the guy around that's going to give you all kinds of new life? What is the deal? Why are you asking him to leave? So he got in the boat and returned. That's the end of the kind of a piece with that. Well, I began to think about it. This great new healing people, and yet they were afraid. Okay. Did anybody see the David Blaine magic thing last night on ABC? Okay, well, if you've ever, it's worth YouTubing. I almost did a YouTube and popped it up here, but I couldn't get one that I really wanted, so I'm just going to tell you about it, okay? So David Blaine does this magic that is quite exceptional from my standpoint. He has things show up in places they could never show up. I mean, primarily he does it with cards. And so he's visiting all these celebrities, okay? And he's over at Harrison Ford's house in his kitchen. And so he's got this deck of cards, and he hands it to Harrison Ford, and he says, pick out a card and hold it in your mind. And so Harrison Ford does that. And then he gets the card back, and so then he's talking a minute, and usually has got some kind of little ditty to go on there, but he's talking a minute. And then he says, okay, what was the card? And Harrison Ford says, 9 of diamonds. And so he says, pick up that apple over there, would you? And now take a knife and cut it in half. So he's got this brand new apple, and he pops it open, and rolled up in the middle of it is the 9 of diamonds, okay? And so I won't say exactly what Harrison Ford said, but basically he said, get the F out of my house. Now, how cool is that? This, wow, strange thing had gone on. I've never seen anything like it. All of a sudden, this 9 of diamonds is either not in this deck and is end up inside this fruit all rolled up. And, Harrison Ford just holds it up and lets its camera see it. 9 of diamonds sitting there, and it's rolled up in this, whatever it was, apple, orange, whatever it is. So get out of my house. You are some weird guy. And I thought, that's what those people felt. All of a sudden, this guy who they were all comfortable with as being the weirdo freako down at the tombs, all of a sudden, he wasn't the weirdo freako down at the tombs anymore, and they couldn't explain it. And it was an unusual event, and it was so, you know how we are. We spend most of our life figuring out our limits. Are you with me? We learn how to work within the system of the earth and how it works and what doesn't work, and we learn that if we exceed those limits of the earth, that sometimes we're going to have pain. I suspect Sammy's got him a new dirt bike. When I had a dirt bike, I began to learn limits of what they could and couldn't do, and stuff like that. And we all learn those limits. And it's the old hold my beer, I want to try something. We're all pushing limits until we figured out that it's not a good thing. And then all of a sudden somebody comes along like this and operates outside the boundaries of anything we know about. It's frightening. Okay? It's frightening. Now, it doesn't just stop with people. It extends to businesses and organizations. An author named George Leonard, who wrote in his book Mastery that the process that we call homeostasis or homostasis affects our behavior and who we are. Now, the homostasis is a characteristic about human existence that prevents our body from making drastic changes in order to maintain stability in our lives, even if maintaining that stability is detrimental to us. Okay, now here's the example of that. I know that's a concept, and it's going, huh? But in reality, this is, when an obese person starts exercising, homeostasis in the body resists the new activity in order to maintain body stability. You've got to overcome all that before you can even start using weight. In an unstable family where the father has been a raging alcoholic and suddenly stops, it is common that his son or a sibling will start up a drug habit in order to maintain the stability of the family. Because everybody is accustomed to that. They kind of know how to deal with it. It is a movement of homeostasis, okay? Now, here are two industries that have the same thing go on, and this is all history. In 1967, the Swiss Watchmaking Research Lab produced the first quartz movement for a wristwatch. 1967, quartz, okay? Due to advances in microelectronics, integrated circuitry had advanced to allow much less energy to be using, allowing for the miniaturization so that a quartz movement could be fit into a wristwatch. However, the Swiss manufacturers continued to refine their mechanical techniques. Are you with me? You open it up, you see all them things moving in there. Their mechanical techniques, and soon caught up with Bulova, who had helped make that thing that vibrated by a crystal, by traditional means, the mechanical means. After years of research, the Swiss viewed quartz as a fad that would pass, reckoning erroneously that their mechanical excellence would see them survive as kings of the heap. It was a poor judgment that would eventually lead to the demise of several companies. The Japanese picks it up under Seiko and went to town with it because they couldn't get out of their traditional paradigm to think a new way. God is always asking us to think a new way. I don't care how conservative you are, that is the story of the text. Now, during the first half of the 20th century, another industry, railroads, were the primary means of transporting people and goods within the U.S. The rail companies employed as many as 10% of the workers in the United States. At the end of World War II, railroads provided almost 70% of the nation's passenger and freight service. You can see that picture better when it doesn't have so much light on it. It's a good one. Now, new competitors entered the field after World War II. Passengers and shippers began to use trucks, buses, cars, and airplanes. Railroads did not disappear, but they've had to adapt to changes in the transportation industry. Now, what they did was they had to figure out they were not in the railroad business. They were in the transportation business. So they took truck trailers and put them on railroad cars. We've all seen that, right? Because they began to have to think a new way in order to survive. And somebody comes in and does something that way, and we're almost accustomed to that unless you're in the church. And I won't even get into that. But I'm just saying that my wonderful brother-in-law, David, last week had some jazz musicians play down in worship because he's aware that they're on TV, every Sunday, 11 o'clock. And he's aware that watching it on TV is like, okay? And he's trying to make it to where it's more, and he had some people walk out on him because that was nightclub music in church, okay? God will get in the boat and go back home and let you live with your contradictions. And so the trouble is that we have few, if any, maps on how to guide us in this journey. And so that's why it's so important that we learn faith, that we learn the relationship to be close to the one who has gone through it all, to be close to the one who's dreaming it all up. That's why you'll find the consistent message that I come out of Odyssey all the time is I want you to nurture that relationship with the source of all being, because that relationship will take you from here to Shinola and back, wherever you're going. And that's what I keep working on. And that's how transformation takes place with all of us. Stuff happens, things change, we get afraid, and we march forward. So then this dude who first voiced a protest, Jesus, Son of the Most High God, what have you do with me, now turns to him and says, and now I want to have to do with you. I want to be who you are, where you are. I want to be with you. It says he begged that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away saying, return to your home and declare how much God has done for you. And that is finally how we approach this whole thing. I don't ever want you to feel like you have to talk about anything that you don't have personal experience with when you're a person of faith. And I want you to have that personal experience. So we ask God for help to claim our demons, to name them one by one, to be willing to overcome the homostasis, to live in the new possibility, and to share our story. And the Holy Spirit will be our constant companion. Let us pray. Lord Jesus, we do come to you because you're the one that comes along and moves things and changes things and asks us to think differently and surprises us with stuff that we don't understand. But we're close to you and we know that you're trying to care for us. We know you're trying to heal us from our demons or save us from the kind of torment that happens with nature and storms and all those things. And you're trying to lift us up from that which we would die with. And we give you thanks for that. And we pray that you will enable us to make the journey beside you. Amen.